Introduction. Volume 20 Overview. Volume 20 begins by looking beyond immediate survival. Rudius and Orsted think about the future war with Laplace, while everyday life continues to evolve through graduation, business plans, family growth, and an unexpected summons connected to Zenith. This volume has a transitional structure. It includes calmer developments like graduation and business growth, but every peaceful moment is shadowed by the knowledge that larger conflicts are still approaching. Cliff's research, Zenoba's store, Norn's growth, and Aisha's management work all highlight how the cast is maturing. Volume 20 is about change, movement, and the way adulthood reshapes everyone's path. The letter from Claire Latria becomes the turning point of the volume. It gives Rudius a personal reason to travel to Millie's, intertwining family tension with church politics and unfinished emotional business. Keep an eye on the graduation scenes, the dull business growth, Sophie's pregnancy, the journey to Millichan, and the emotionally charged confrontation with Claire and the Millie's church hierarchy. Event 1. Orsted and Rudius plan for the future. Volume 20 begins with Rudius reviewing the larger plan against Hitagami. The goal is no longer just surviving the present. They now need to prepare for the war that will happen decades later, when Laplace returns. Orsted and Rudius divide the strategy into 3 directions. They need intelligence from the Rude Mercenary Company, political allies with long-term influence, and strong fighters who can stand against Laplace in the future. Rudius realizes that Hitagami can still target people around their organization. Since the human god can only use a limited number of apostles, the safest answer is to build a network large enough that one betrayal cannot destroy everything. They also need a better way to communicate when they are separated. Orsted begins working on a device inspired by adventurer cards and the stone monuments of the 7 great powers. Rudius also wants a practical way to carry the bulky magic armor Mark I. His idea is to use summoning magic, but for now he still needs to learn how to summon inorganic objects properly. Event 2. Cliff receives a difficult letter from Millie's. Rudius visits Cliff and Elenelise after Cliff receives a letter from his grandfather, the Pope of the Millie's church. The letter sounds warm, but it also warns Cliff about political conflict inside the Millie's religious order. Cliff had always planned to return after graduation, but now the decision feels much heavier. Cliff is no longer alone. He has Elenelise and their son Clive, and bringing them into Millie's politics could put them in danger, especially because Elenelise is an elf and certain Millie's factions are hostile toward non-humans. Rudius offers Cliff a place in Orsted's faction. It would give Cliff protection and support, while Cliff would help prepare for the future battle against Laplace. Cliff does not answer immediately. He wants time to think, and he plans to give Rudius his decision around graduation. This shows how seriously Cliff wants to stand on his own feet. Event 3. The Zenoba store idea begins. Rudius visits Zenoba, who has settled near him after leaving Chirne behind and is now living with Ginger and Julie. Zenoba and Julie are still deeply involved in doll making, and Rudius sees an opportunity to restart the Ruijerd figurine project. The goal is not only business. Rudius hopes that spreading Ruijerd dolls and stories will improve the Supered race's reputation, and maybe even help him locate Ruijerd again. The store also serves another purpose. By drawing in craftsmen and technicians, Rudius may find people who can help improve the magic armor, whose development has become difficult. Zenoba and Julie agree to begin mass production. A small business idea becomes part of Rudius's larger plan to gather allies and reshape public opinion. Event 4. Cliff helps Norn defeat a wraith. At the university, Cliff submits his thesis on tools that suppress curses, and the staff recognize that his research could become historically important. Even though Cliff's work is excellent, he is not chosen as the top graduate. In the past this would have deeply angered him, but now he accepts it with more maturity. Soon after, Cliff finds Norn and the student council dealing with a dangerous wraith in a basement warehouse. Norn does not want to rely on Rudius, so Cliff steps in to help. The wraith controls skeletons and the student council begins to struggle. Cliff uses his magic eye to locate the weak point and defeats the monster with his magic. Afterward, they hold a funeral for the dead students connected to the wraith's origin. Cliff and Norn speak honestly about independence, limits, and when it is acceptable to ask others for help. Event 5. Cliff and Zenoba graduate. In the 2 months before graduation, Rudius and Zenoba prepare the first storefront for their doll business. At the graduation ceremony, Cliff and Zenoba stand among hundreds of graduates. Zenoba is allowed to graduate as a special student, and Cliff's achievements are quietly recognized even if he is not named the representative. Rudius notices Cliff looks troubled. Cliff is still deciding whether to accept Rudius's offer or pursue his own path in Millie's without direct support from Orsted. After the ceremony, a graduate named Brooklyn challenges Rudius to a duel. Rudius accepts and defeats him easily, after which many other graduates also ask to test themselves against him. Finally, Cliff gives his answer. He will return to Millie's in the future and climb the religious order through his own strength. Rudius is worried, but he chooses to respect Cliff's pride and independence. Event 6. Nia visits Asura. Away from Rudius's main household, Ina Farian receives a letter from Isolt inviting her to Asura for Ariel's coronation celebrations. Nina arrives in the capital and is overwhelmed by the size, crowds, and festival atmosphere. She also encounters the growing popularity of Rudius's supered picture books and dolls. When Nina sees Eris with Rudius and Lucy, she is shocked. The fierce mad dog she remembers is now a wife and mother, living a warmer life than Nina expected. At a noble party, Nina misunderstands a private meeting between Ariel and Rudius and briefly thinks Ariel is being threatened. Once the truth is explained, the misunderstanding becomes almost funny. Rudius uses the gathering to recruit distant allies for Orsted's future cause. Nina eventually returns home changed by what she saw, and she soon decides to marry Gino. Event 7. Norn and Aisha become adults. Norn is now doing well as student council president, while Aisha helps manage the rude mercenary company with Linnea and Persina. Their 15th birthday approaches, which marks adulthood in this world. Rudius initially wants a big surprise party, but the family helps him understand that a simpler and more thoughtful celebration is better. Everyone prepares gifts. Norn receives practical and heartfelt presents, while Aisha's gifts are chosen with her responsibilities and interests in mind. Rudius gives Aisha a Migurd pendant modeled after the one Ruigerd once gave him. Aisha thanks him, but her expression is unusually blank, as if she is thinking deeply about adulthood. The celebration becomes lively when friends, students, and members of the mercenary company join in. Aisha eventually smiles genuinely, and the party becomes a warm family milestone. Event 8. Growth and New Horizons. Rudius makes progress with bidirectional magic circles, allowing him to summon the magic armor more effectively. Orsted also finishes the first version of the lithographic communication device. It is heavy and mana-hungry, but it allows messages drawn on one tablet to appear on another. At home, the children are growing. Lucy learns magic from Sylphie and Roxy and practices basic sword movements with Eris. Laura is still watched closely by the sacred beast Leo, while young Ars is growing into a cheerful baby who reacts differently depending on who holds him. This event shows that Rudius's life is expanding in two directions at once: family life at home and long-term preparations for a future war. Event 9. Cliff's farewell party changes Rudius's plans. After Rudius's own graduation, everyone gathers at a tavern to celebrate Cliff before his eventual departure for Millie's. Cliff explains that he intends to leave his family behind temporarily and climb the Millie's hierarchy on his own. His goal is to become powerful enough to protect them and support Rudius later. Elinolise quietly pulls Rudius aside. She knows Cliff wants independence, but she also knows Millie's politics are dangerous and asks Rudius to support him if needed. Rudius had promised not to interfere unless Cliff asked, but he understands Elinolise's fear. He decides that going to Millie's may be necessary after all. This decision shifts the story from graduation and family life toward the next political arc in the holy country of Millie's. Event 10. Claire Latrea's letter arrives. When Rudius returns home, Aisha, Norn, and Lilia show him a letter from Zenith's mother, Claire Latrea. The letter was written in response to Rudius's old message about Zenith's condition. Because mail to Millie's takes years, the response arrives long after he sent the original report. Claire commands Rudius to bring Zenith back to Millie's, along with Norn and Aisha. The reactions from Norn and Aisha make it clear that their grandmother is not easy to deal with. Norn refuses because she wants to continue school. Aisha agrees to go if she can avoid meeting Claire directly and instead work on setting up the mercenary company's Millie's branch. The travel party takes shape. Rudius, Cliff, Aisha, Lilia, and Zenith are expected to go. Roxy, Sylphie, and Eris are meant to stay behind for different practical and political reasons. Event 11. Sylphie's pregnancy changes the household. Just before departure, the family discovers that Sylphie is pregnant again. Rudius is overjoyed, but Lilia panics because she was supposed to accompany Zenith to Millie's and also wants to support Sylphie at home. Rudius considers staying behind, but the family has multiple layers of support. Roxy, Eris, and Elinolise can help Sylphie with the children and household. Then Zenith unexpectedly takes Lilia's hand and places it on Sylphie's shoulder. It feels as if Zenith is silently asking Lilia to stay and care for Sylphie instead of going to Millie's. Lilia accepts Zenith's silent request and stays home. Aisha takes responsibility for accompanying Zenith, making the journey emotionally heavier for her. Event 12. The journey to Militian. Rudius leaves equipped with the Mark IIb armor, the communication lithograph, and a summoning scroll for the Mark I armor. Before leaving, he gathers what he can about Claire Latreia. Everyone describes her as strict, stubborn, and deeply tied to lineage and Millie's doctrine. Cliff explains that House Grimoire and House Latreia are politically opposed. Cliff's family leans toward demon integration, while Latreia supports the anti-demon cardinal faction. The group uses Orsted's teleportation circle, arriving in a forest several days from Millie's. From there they buy a carriage and continue normally. When the white city of Militian finally appears, Rudius is impressed by its beauty. Cliff, however, wonders how dirty the politics inside such a beautiful place may be. Event 13. Cliff returns home and Jisoo reappears. After 10 years away, Cliff finally returns to Militian and leads the group toward his family home. In the Adventurer District, Rudius unexpectedly meets Jisoo again. Jisoo cheerfully explains what happened after they parted ways in Sharia. Jisoo reveals that he lost his money through gambling, and Talhan sold his valuable gauntlets to cover Jisoo's debts. Rudius realizes how deep their friendship must be. Jisoo leaves just as suddenly as he arrived, reminding Rudius of Paul's words from the labyrinth. The moment feels light on the surface but meaningful underneath. The group reaches Cliff's modest family house, cleans the dusty rooms, eats together, and prepares to visit the Latreia residence the next day. Event 14. The confrontation with Claire Latreia. Rudius enters the Latreia mansion with Zenith and Aisha, knowing the meeting will probably be difficult. Claire immediately shows her harsh personality. She treats Aisha like a maid because of her clothing and refuses to acknowledge Rudius until he proves his identity and standing. Rudius introduces himself firmly as a head of the Greyrat family, an ally of Queen Ariel, and a subordinate of Orsted. Only then does Claire adjust her tone. The conversation worsens when Claire speaks about arranging Norn's future marriage and treating Zenith according to Millie's values, especially her ability to bear children. When Claire suggests marrying Zenith off to a noble faction, Rudius loses his temper. He takes Zenith and Aisha away, furious that Claire would treat her own daughter like an object. Event 15. The Millie's Church, Therese, the Miko, and the Pope. After returning to Cliff's house, Cliff encourages Rudius to at least hear other perspectives before judging all of Millie's. At the church headquarters, Rudius waits outside and meets the Miko's armed escorts. They quickly accuse him of beating a heretic, and the situation almost turns violent. Therese Latreia appears and stops them. Rudius recognizes her as the woman who helped him during his earlier journey, and she warmly welcomes him as family. Rudius also meets the Miko, whose power lets her determine truth. She confirms that Rudius is not lying and becomes interested when she hears about Eris and Orsted. Inside the church, Rudius meets Cliff's grandfather, the Pope. The Pope has already researched him carefully and understands that Rudius's goals include the mercenary branch, supered goods, and future cooperation with Orsted. Event 16. Zenith disappears with Jisoo. After the meeting with the Pope, Rudius feels caught between factions and decides not to choose a side too quickly. He plans to focus first on setting up the Millie's branch of the Rude Mercenary Company and learning more about the Miko, Claire, and the Pope before judging who may be dangerous. When Rudius returns to Cliff's house, he finds Aisha furious and near tears. Wendy explains that Jisoo came by claiming to be Zenith's friend and took her out of the house. At first Rudius tries to stay calm, trusting that Jisoo would not intentionally hurt Zenith. But as time passes and they do not return, worry begins to replace patience. Rudius equips himself and takes Aisha with him to search for Zenith. The volume ends with a tense cliffhanger, as Rudius fears he may be walking into another trap like the one in Shirn. Conclusion. Volume 20 payoff. By the end of Volume 20, Rudius has traveled to Millie's, confronted difficult family tensions, met important church figures, and been drawn into a confusing situation that ends with Zenith disappearing alongside Jisoo. This volume highlights how Rudius now lives between personal and political worlds. He is a father, husband, graduate, businessman, and Orsted's subordinate all at once, and Millie's forces those roles to collide. A great strength of Volume 20 is its broadcast development. Multiple supporting characters reach new milestones, making the world feel alive and showing that Rudius is surrounded by people who are also growing up. The meetings in Millie's do not lead to simple closure. Instead, they deepen the emotional and political tension around Zenith, Claire, Therese, the Miko, and the Pope, leaving the story in a suspenseful state. Volume 20 works beautifully as a bridge volume. It gives satisfying progress in daily life while steering the story toward a more personal conflict centered on family, belief, and the unresolved pain surrounding Zenith. Extras. Bonus highlights beyond the main plot. Volume 20 contains many rewarding details. Cliff's academic success, Zenoba's business efforts, Nina's Asura visit, Norn and Aisha's maturity, and Rudius's evolving magical research. The graduation material is more important than it first appears. It gives a sense that an era of youthful routine is ending, and that everyone around Rudius is moving into adult responsibilities. The doll business is a charming but meaningful subplot. It shows how creative hobbies, friendship, and practical planning can become a real future for characters who once felt isolated or directionless. Sophie's pregnancy brings warmth and joy, but it also increases the emotional weight of Rudius's trip. Every risk he takes now matters even more, because his family continues to grow. Volume 20 matters, because it strengthens character relationships, while setting up one of the next major emotional conflicts. It is a volume about movement, maturity, and the quiet tension before a storm.